Okay, so I've realized in posting about the Venus calendar that I have opened up a fairly large can of worms, and Elise, you're asking some questions that go not just to the Venus calendar, but through it and beyond it to the other calendars, and in a way the philosophy and the techniques behind the whole. So I think that I owe you a kind of a general mission statement, I guess, about what it is that I'm doing, and where the Venus calendar kind of fits in it. So here's the thing: the calendars. I have actually designed and drafted over 30 for different bodies. So including moons, including exoplanets, um, and including purely abstract counts. I have been, I think it's fair to say, fairly obsessed with the question of what does a calendar do? How does a calendar process and shape time? How are images of time affected by a calendar? I've also um, come to the conclusion, or I don't want to say conclusion, but I've come to the position um, that I think the most interesting way to approach time is not through a monotemporal coding, which is to say, one way of measuring it as if it was a single quantity flattened into a single stream, right? Forwards and backwards and center. Um, and so for me, I talk about polycalendrics quite a bit, and time streams. So multiple streams of time. So there are so many moving parts to the larger picture of this that I will do my very best to do justice to it. But basically, what you see with the Venus calendar is the simplest of all of my calendrical works to um, to access if you have never encountered this before. In fact, it's so easy to access that I don't even have to say it's a calendar. I just have to say, okay, we're doing a course, and this is the theme of the week, because it follows the beat of seven. And the problem is that really, with maybe one exception, none of the other calendars follow a beat that is commensurable to how we normally follow time. So the thing with Venus, what makes it so handy, and why I use it as the portal, is that it is completely commensurate with how we already use time. We use the 7-day week, and because the Venus calendar and the remainder of the Venus day, right, that point 0.7 is all ultimately commensurable into a number that's divisible by 7. It really never slips, except maybe like way down the road it'll slip off by a day, and then we'll have to figure out how to deal with it. But we're talking about like probably on the order of a couple thousand years. um, Okay, so why not start with a bit of a history of how I came to be making magical calendars? Um, I grew up in North America. I grew up in Ottawa, and I grew up in the 80s. And one of the first memories that I have is watching the first episode of Tom Baker's iteration of Doctor Who. So I was pretty keen on time machines and the idea of time travel. My mind was primed to the question of um, what does it mean to travel in time? And I think if you think about that long enough, you realize there's something a little bit facile about the notion that time travel involves a stark, um, reversal of directionality when direction in time seems really to be kind of a metaphor anyways, something superimposed upon it. So it occurred to me, I guess, in the first 10 years of my heavy involvement with esotericism. I mean, like, if you go all the way back to when I was like whatever, 5 or 6, I was holding tarot and I was sort of flirting with esotericism, but I wouldn't count that as my dates. I'd say about 19 I got serious about tarot. And so I don't know, maybe 3, 4 years later, I found myself answering the question, what is a time machine, with the answer, the calendar is a time machine. And this is before I'd seen any alternatives to it. Although there was this New Age Mayan calendar that was going around called the Dream Spell. It was developed by a fellow Mexican guy named Jose Arquillas, who took the tree calendar that is ascribed to Druidry and the I think coming out of the White Goddess and all that kind of stuff. But that calendar took that Bethlehemian calendar and then ran the 260-day Mayan Tzolk'in cycle through it. And the Mayan Tzolk'in is really interesting. It's 13 times 20. They counted on their fingers and toes and the principal articulations of the body, of which there's 13. So like I got 1, 2, 3, and then my hips and my knee and my ankles on both sides at 6 and 6, and then my neck is the 7th. So 6 plus 1 plus 6 is 13. So there is this, we call it the holon, but it's like kind of like a chakra system, but you've got your 20 fingers and toes and then this holon. So that's the 260-day, that's the new ageified 260-day Tzolk'in. And it's a magical system. And what's interesting about it is they lay it out in 13 runs of 20. So instead of having time just proceeding in a line, you have it side by each, kind of a loom or a weave. And there were structures built laterally across that weave, which I found very interesting. And it provided a whole new image of time. The idea is that certain days would have a power that, if activated, would create an orthogonal structure that carried across time. I discovered more stuff about orthogonal time when I was reading Philip K. Dick's Exegesis, which has lots of stuff about, the Holy Spirit moving backwards in time and, the different things coming from the side and, the Roman prison attempting to lock it all into place. And of course, what that has in common with the Mayan calendar theme is the issue of the Gregorian calendar, which has a massive monopoly on time. The Gregorian calendar was designed, of course, to compensate for the fact that the Julian calendar, which was developed by, Julius, but really Augustus, it was built to compensate for the fact that was slipping, and it really came in at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and of course brought with it the clock and other techniques. So it really sort of cemented the time is money mentality. And what Jose Arquillas was looking to do, and what I'm also looking to do, although differently, is to find other energies that the calendar will transmute time into. So if the Gregorian calendar transmutes time into money, is that because time is money, or because the Gregorian calendar makes it into money? What about the Chinese calendar? What about the wheel of the year? They don't make time into money. They turn it into different things. So time flows through these transformational chambers in different ways. And is outputted in different ways. Jose would say that time is art, and obviously I've defined magic as the pressure of art brought to bear on time, so I'm somewhere in that mix. Now, I entered this calendar creation project really in 2003. That was my big kind of catalyzation year. I moved to Newfoundland. I lived in Newfoundland for 12 years, which was kind of my homeland. And in 2003, tons of stuff happened. I started, questioning. Obviously, I was working with the Thoth Tarot a lot, and I tried some new techniques that showed me that maybe the Thoth wasn't the paradigm I wanted to be working in exclusively, and so things started to get really funky. And the concept of ma'at, balance, became very important to me. Social justice obviously was important to me, so I was more leaning towards the left side of the the spectrum politically and spiritually. So I was attracted to just ideas that challenged hegemonic power. And of course, the hegemonic power of the Gregorian calendar is pretty obvious. There have been attempts to shake it. The French had a republican calendar during the Revolution that lasted 12 years before Napoleon traded it back. The Russians also, during the Revolution, tried to replace the Gregorian calendar. In both cases, they did it by trying to get rid of the weekday, and sorry, the 7-day week. They were trying to get rid of Sunday. They were trying to get rid of the spirit. I think they failed for that reason. If you want to look up, there's a guy named Eviatar Zerubbabel, who sounds like he'd be like some out there conspiracy theorist, but actually he's like a full-on cognitive scientist and academic. He was a student of Grice, and in any rate, so he writes about calendars and as architectures, as sites, meta objects, if you will. Okay, so where do I come into this? Well, I see no particular reason to have a monotemporal reality. I picked up a heliocentric ephemeris by Roger Hand, or Robert Hand, whatever his name is, in I don't know, 2002, and it became the seed out of which I started to divine this, because I realized, well, Mercury has an 88-day year, and I can easily chunk that into 22 groups of 4. So that's great. And Mercury's 88-day year is pretty, like 88 Earth days, I mean. I'm not actually counting the days on the other planets, although I've kind of looked at that, but it crosses its north node, and then it goes around, and it takes about 88 Earth days. There is a small remainder, and I have a mechanism for compensating for it, but by and large, it's got an 88 Earth day cycle. So it's an Earth-based calendar that links us to the movements of the planets, heliocentrically speaking. So why? If I wanted qualitative time, why wouldn't I just do astrology? Astrology is geocentric, and that's fine. I am finding myself doing this kind of calendrics because what I've realized is that the Copernican revolution has had consequences that we are still affected by. And one of the consequences is it plunged us into a world that had not been, while it was quantitatively mapped, it had not been qualitatively mapped. And it takes a huge long time for a full qualitative set of symbols to come to rest on a world that is basically opened up. So I'd say the Copernican revolution opened up a world that had not been populated, or shall we say cogniformed, by symbols and associations. So in this world, calculation and machinic kind of logic reigned supreme for a little while. And this is the so-called Enlightenment, right? That gave us the basically sociopathic treatment of the world as a machine, following Descartes. I don't follow Descartes. I'm way more of a Spinozist, so I see a real a holism to all of it. And I see us now in a place where we're actually leaving that world, the sun at the center, the heliocentric world. We're leaving that way behind. At this point, the new horizon is the galaxy. So what does that mean? It means that populating or cogniforming the heliocentric cosmos is going to be part of how we come to terms with or populate symbolically, magically, that other tier, that vacuum that essentially science left. And it's a funny thing because I kind of follow Gene Gebser, who wrote the Ever-Present Origin, good book. And he's got this idea of mutations of spirit. So the magical mutation, our first departure from the continuum, and then mythopoesis, the second departure, and then mental calculation, the third departure. These mutations he talks about, kind of like aeons. And now he talks about the integral mutation. And I interpret these as having to do with the centers of measure. So I would say that, we have the Tao consciousness that human beings have that is centerless. And then magic, which is centered on the compass rose. And mythos, or mythopoesis, which is centered around the the geocentric cosmos. Then the mental mutation, the mental stage, which is centered around the heliocentric cosmos, and then this new stage that's developing that's exploring the galactic and transgalactic structures that we're discovering. So in each of these mutations, we have to process this new space and kind of, I say cogniform or chronoform it to come to terms with what it means to be conscious in this world. And it's like you have this pearl of magic and this larger pearl of myth and this larger pearl of science. And from the point of view of a dichotomy between the two, it's like science versus religion. It's all these. I don't play like that. I see them as beads strung together. So what's happening in our current reality is not a falling back, it's not reducing things to science. It's not falling back on myth or falling back on astrology or falling back on elemental magic. It's carrying the elements of elemental magic, astrology, geocentrism, science forward into an integrated model of mind and cosmos. I would say a threefold integration of psyche, socius, and cosmos. So, okay, told you it was a can of worms. So where are we with these calendars? Yes, the Venus calendar is quite elegant and easy to follow because it's the 7-day week and it gives us a tarot theme, and you don't really have to know anything more about that. But I'm gonna just have your questions up that I want to address directly. So with the other calendars, they're not all divisible by the same numbers. So 88, of course, your key numbers are going to be 11s. So there's going to be 4 groups of 11 internal to a year on Mercury, which means that if you're following the mercurial calendar, and bear in mind, I follow these simultaneously, right? The main set is 8, so it's Mercury out to Neptune, and that's the main set. And the idea is, like with the Venus, they each have a different internal structure, a different internal set of divisions with symbolic associations that are essentially hosted upon those rhythms. So as the planet moves, as time passes through that set of chambers, it's affected and transformed and resonates with different symbol systems, which has enabled me to create a syncretic, I guess a crucible, to bring multiple magical systems as well as scientific bodies of data to bear on different counts. So each count creates an image of time, and those image of time may have multiple chambers, camerae, as Ramana Lowell would call it. So, for example, we've got 32 key chambers to the Venus calendar, and they are the 32 intelligences of the Kabbalah, or the 32 key parts of the tarot. Easy. Tree of life. Bang. And we have them in 10 years, so each year is associated with a sphere. Right now we're in Chesed. That's pretty simple. What about the 88 days of Mercury? I did this first, right? So the 88 days of Mercury have that 22-fold working through the paths, because I did originally develop this as an automated path working system. But 88 is also the number of modern constellations. So each day is a constellation. So if you study and meditate on the constellations, you build an internal memory palace of all the constellations. So all 88 constellations, and you can, and you can, by naming them, of course, you can grow to learn them. So you have this inherent stellarium built into the Mercury calendar. And I have also worked with Enochian. One of the things about Enochian is if you take the 4 watchtowers, and if you look at the corrected, if you look at the fact that basically the governors, the 91 governors or 92 governors, are these kind of squiggles that are 7-letter names that, like puzzle pieces, fit together to form this this tableau of 4 watchtowers and then a cross in the center. So there are 92 in total. One is a secret one. Oh, there's lots of blinds, but the blinds have been removed, and there's documents for that. We figured that out. David Allen Hulse is good for it. But in the watchtowers themselves, there are 22 governors in each one. So I developed a method of getting 4 governors, one for each of the watchtowers, assigned to each of the tarot trumps. So now I have 88 images that are connecting the tarot to the Enochian watchtowers, and linking that up. So when I work the Mercury calendar, which has this 88-day period, which is much more challenging to follow, because it doesn't get reified by daily life like the 7-day count does. That then integrates another component. It brings in the governors of Enochian. The Mars count has 687 days. Again, it's actually quite close to the Earth. So it's quite close to the Earth days. So I don't really have to add in leap day calculations in the same way, except for like at long intervals. But its divisibility, since it's 687, is 30 times 22 plus 27, I believe. So imagine that as 30 times 11 plus 27 plus 30 times 11. So why 30? 30 Enochian ethers, right? So the ethers themselves then have a have loci, and are assigned images. And I scry all this stuff, right? So I get images and I put them on my little cards and so on, that I do through various different forms of scrying, Black Mirror or otherwise. And I make these chips so that I can track the different time streams as they pass through the camerae of, or chambers of, these multiple magical systems, which I have sort of found modes of expression in terms of working with their numbers and assigning them to planets. So Mars basically cycles through the Enochian ethers, but in 22 stages. So you can see there's tons of connectivity between the different systems. The Earth calendar itself is quite complex. I built one for the 2012 date. It was my last great calendar. I built in 2010, and it was going to start in 2012, and it was the last of kind of my early creative period. But then I was commissioned, actually, out of, believe it or not, out of the conference we were at, the Trans States. I was commissioned to, or given sort of a grant, to build another another Earth-based calendar, and I got some ideas and input from outside. So we built this thing, or I built this thing. I don't know. There was this kind of there were I was given some ideas, and then I did my magic. But this calendar also it's called a fairy dog. So it's not part of the original suite, but I mean it's an open-ended system anyways. So we've got this fairy dog calendar that is very much connected to Scotland. It's connected to the Schehallien, and its year starts at the moment that Sirius can be seen to rise from the top of Schehallien. And I did this calculation using Stellarium, which is a simulation program. So we built this beautiful calendar. I mean, it's really great. It works with the Shemha Mepharash Angels and Demons, but it also has it has some cool sacred geometries in it, and it shifts towards Enochian every 4 years. So the leap years are actually radically different in structure than regular years. What else? So there's also, yeah, Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus and Neptune. I am now actively practicing or following them all out to Jupiter. I am extending this practice, of course, because this is an evolving thing, but it takes time, because it's one thing to conceive of the framework. It's another thing to actually put it into place as daily meditations. Because every time you add a layer, you're talking juggling, really, it's literally juggling time streams. And you have to figure out, it can be quite exhausting. You end up having to integrate these multiple moving parts. And if you see the oracles that I leave on, that I put on my wall in my on the, what do you call it, Instagram, those oracles are me tracking 5 calendars, so all the way up to Jupiter. And of course there's more coming. This, for example, this is a parapegma. You can move a nail through it. This is for the fairy dog. It's a working process. You move a nail to mark the different the various different cycles. Parapegmas were used in the ancient world to mark early calendars. They were using other planets like Mercury, or not Mercury, but they were certainly using Venus. I think the 7-day week was a Venus calendar to begin with, but that's a whole other argument. The can of worms is enormous. So what is it we're doing? Overlaying or developing a calendrics that doesn't directly challenge the Gregorian calendar, but through a kind of Buckminster Fullerian type of, well, design something better and then leave the problematic system in your dust kind of attitude. That's kind of what we're at. So a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, multimodal vision of time that is highly qualitative, has multiple layers, increases kind of surface area. I was struck by what Aoife was saying in the interview about her drawings, about building an ark for a coming flood. This is really strongly what I feel that I've been compelled to do, is to compose a kind of an orally transmittable computer. And I read a lot of Raman Lowell in my PhD thesis, where I actually detailed all of this. I developed and published in my PhD thesis, which was controversial as you can imagine. But yeah, so Raman Lowell, sort of seen as the progenitor of computer science, and then the concept of the computus, the concept of the memory palace, and the phantasmagoria of the Renaissance being externalized into computers, which I call exo memory palaces, or cinema, which is like an an exo, it's type of an exo memory palace in a sense. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of the externalization of our inward capacities, but then what I'm interested in is, what would a re-internalization look like? Thinking Dune styles, right? I'm a big fan of Dune. So the mentat, the Butlerian jihad, the mentat idea of reclaiming for the body this skill set that computers have taken over. And I see this as being a huge thing that's happening now with people, with the boom of magic and the phenomenal boom of the divinatory arts and unprecedented level of access to sophisticated magical systems. And I think we're all players in this blossoming. And so we have so much individually and collectively to offer. And there's something growing here that's like nothing the world has seen. It's not falling back to the old ways, but it's also not leaving them behind. I really do think that we're developing something new. And one of the contributions I want to make is a vision of time based on a polycalendrical orrery. The name of the system in toto is the Ibisystem Orrery. Sometimes I call the Ibisystem Apocalyptic Orrery, but where apocalypse, of course, being the revelation of the structuration of time. So the IAO book is coming out, and so probably during the course of this course, when my book comes out, then there'll be like a full-on textbook for the broader technical issues. But since you're asking me these key questions, I figured I'd give you something. So yeah. Whew. So the other calendars do not start on their astrological days because they're not necessarily keyed to the number 7, right? They're keyed to different things. So really, but I see what you're saying. Like Mercury doesn't start on Mercredi because it's got an 11-day cycle. So the only one that's really super duper solid and connected so strongly to its astrological day is Venus. Adjusting the leap years. Yeah, I mean, I looked at the numbers. I looked at the orbit, and I figured out what I needed to do to make sure that my calendars would not fall away from that orbit. But I didn't fudge it that much more than that. I mean, most of the artistic license or aesthetic work had to do with internal subdivisions of the calendars, choosing I'm going to divide it in such and such a way. So a month on Venus is a month 28 days. Well, no, because Venus doesn't have a moon. But it's a convenient name for it, because that's the thing. There's all these kinds of weird cycles and subcycles, and what do I call them all? The Grand Forest. I mean, I called it a Grand Forest. I could just call it a decade. Grand Forest actually seems kind of pompous, but there you go. I had my moment. I'm going to call it the Grand Forest. I like calling it the Forest of Life because I think it will grow a forest of temporalities. So super interesting question about how the 28 days would fit with the menstrual cycle. I guess I don't know. Does it flow with the 28-day period? I mean, the lunar cycle is 29 days, right? 29 and a half. The 28 is kind of, I mean, is an average. I think there's the sidereal cycle is 27 and the lunation cycle is 29. And then 28 is somewhere in the average. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. If the female, yeah, well, if the menstrual cycle is playing 28 days rhythm, I'm actually kind of surprised at that because it's but maybe if that's true, you would know better than I. Then I mean, I suppose it could sync with Venus. I mean, I think the whole thing is an interlocking set of. I don't want to say gears. I hate the idea of saying gears because it's not chunky in that way. It's flowing and they're in these grooves. But they're not totally in these grooves. You know, that there's an 8-year cycle where Venus goes around the Earth. The Venus has 5 conjunction cycles, and the conjunction cycles are at 5 equidistant points, creating a great pentagram across the sky. I mean, you guys know that. But this fits into the calendar too. I calculate larger than, the longer cycles work into that. So that's something I think is especially beautiful about the Venus calendar is we're talking 40, 80-year cycles where there's meshes with the weekdays and there's meshes with the orbit of the Earth. Mercury's great because Mercury conjoins once and only once with each planet in the entire solar system over the course of one orbit. What we call a Mercury retrograde, oh no, is actually a conjunction of Mercury with the Earth. So that's, from my point of view, retrogrades don't mess with me at all because I'm doing this heliocentric thing. I'm like, oh, conjunction. But so you can get into the patterns created by, every year has a unique fingerprint of conjunctions. So, so yeah, what happens when menstrual cycles sync to Venus? I don't know. Uh, yeah, I mean, let me know if you have insight into that. Uh, then here, yeah, what Venusian qualities does working this calendar bring to the tree of life? And how is it different from the other calendars? Well, they're all unique. They're all absolutely unique, and they all contribute their flavors. These polycalendrics, and there's both a kind of a pre-Copernican symbolic, traditional association scheme, and then there's sort of what opens up in this post Copernican methodology, and I think somehow the, they're both are contributors. Like, I don't see Venus as absolutely fully governed by exact any strict set of traditional symbolisms, but I see it as very, to my mind, is very green. Of course, that's a very Kabbalistic way of looking at it. It's very organic. And so I call it the forest of life. I mean, it's so lovely that it fits so well with its own symbolism. That actually led me onto all sorts of investigations. I was like, how could, to the point where I began to suspect that the ancients knew quite a bit more about heliocentrism than we are led to believe, and even the possibility that they were aware of the outer planets. I've found some striking coincidences. I'm by no means a conspiracy theorist. If I can dismiss something, then I probably will, because I don't want to be like wearing a tinfoil hat, but or resting on conjecture. That's really it, actually. Forget the tinfoil hat thing. I just don't want to rest on. I don't want to rest with certainty upon conjecture. I'm happy to play upon conjecture, but I certainly don't want to build a house on it. And yet, I'm finding things that are quite surprising. What Venusian qualities does it bring to the tree of life? I think it. Well, I mean, my emphasis is really on the forest, on the multiplication of trees of life. So I'll tell you, I had a vision of a tree in a forest that was not the biggest tree in the forest. It was a little tree, or a mid-sized tree. And this tree, though, was interesting because unlike all the other trees in the forest, this tree, when you climbed its branches, you found that it was bigger on the inside than on the outside. It's like the TARDIS tree, the key tree, the golden tree. And in this tree, I encountered a school of druids. And now here's the thing. I mean, I have to basically admit that what I'm doing is it's post chaos magic. It's post contemporary philosophy. It's super syncretic. It's bringing all these streams in. I have to be conscious about all sorts of things. Cultural appropriation, going around calling myself a druid, or so on. I have to say that I'm inspired by the Ogums. The Ogums figure big actually in the fairy dog count, and I found ways of bringing the runes and the Ogums and other things in. But I felt like in this tree was this sort of college of druids, and they weren't traditional. I have no idea really the tradition. I'm not. I mean, there's Irish blood, but I'm not a follower of that. So, I'm I've been in North America for ages, 5 generations or something like that. So But who are these druids? They're basically just scholars. Are they rhapsodes, bards, druids? They're beings who, I mean, maybe they're Chinese sages. I don't think it matters. They're beings who work with magic to modulate the thresholds of consciousness and reality. And in other words, time. They're bringing art to bear on the unfolding of time in order to create, shall we say, comprehensive temporal dreamscapes that are filled with love. That's it. I mean, if there's a quality that Venus brings, it's love. This is all love, love, love. Love in the sense, l'œuf, the egg, right? In tennis, love, 0. The egg. The forest is, the forest of life is a temporality that sprouts waves upon waves of trees of all different species and kinds, and its function as we work with the tarot is as a tarot incubator. It incubates magical systems, and it will foster a proliferation of complex and diverse and multi-layered, almost an ecology of temporalities connected to magical systems of all different kinds. And if you look at how the Venus calendar intersects with the Mercury calendar, I'd say that the Mercury calendar is the mycelium, the network underneath it, and the Forest of Life calendar. So the Mercury calendar is called the Thoth calendar. Forest of Life calendar is the Venus calendar, and so that's creating this really livable kind of space. It's very livable, and so the qualities it brings are love, livability, diversity, and this tree, this little tree full of College of Druids, is like the key tree. You plant it somewhere, and then out of it comes multiple. The whole forest sort of grows forth from this. So it's like a teaching that's modular and rhizomatic, and forest-like. So that's the idea. And one of the experiences I've had is that my abyss crossings, we cross the abyss many times in our lifetimes. My abyss crossings have been increasingly moving from the model of the abyss as a desert to the abyss as a forest, dark forest. But it's a forest. So the forestation of the abyss, love in the abyss. If you put love in the abyss and the 10th ether, Zax, the love is actually what knits through the whole thing. There's a really kind of a fairy feel to my Enokia. Huge can of worms, Elise. I hope that this is. I didn't expect to make a 45-minute video, but I can't really just distill this all into. It's a huge thing. The Ibisystem Orrery is my life's work, and it's enormous, and it's boundaryless. It will eventually become a modality by which exoplanets are incorporated, and by which temporality itself is completely multiplied, and that's it. And so we find our ecological niche within a forest of temporalities, multi-layered, and intimately connected with cosmos, psyche, and socius, a threefold intersection. And this is all sort of done in a spirit of a gift to the future generations, and as a remedial temporal remediation. Also, because metaphor is productive of proliferation of metaphor, I see there be a metaphor depletion going on, particularly through the internet and through. There's a lot of the complex metaphors of the past are getting gradually sort of dumbed down, advertising culture and so on. So this idea of polytemporality is partly geared towards increasing metaphors, surface area, um, providing a modality to weave an oral tradition into a sophisticated, cosmologically realistic understanding of time that can carry with it song and story and orality, bardic, weavings. Many of my calendars, certainly the Mercury calendar, is connected to poetry, right? I'll host poems on certain days and so on, and using it as a memory palace. The octahedron that the Mercury that the Venus calendar can form into also is a component of the Mars calendar, and also fits into a kind of a topology or a picture of multiple crystals and structures that can move and shift and move like birds in flight, that have the capacity to form into temples. And if you heard the Castle of Birds, I don't know if you saw me perform it, but the Castle of Birds is kind of about this, right? It's this emergent, organic, post exocomputus, fail safe orality. That's kind of what I'm hoping to be a player in, is the organic cultivation of a massively diverse global fail-safe orality that'll help us keep our stories and our humanity and our sense and our intelligence, by safeguarding all the layers and connecting us realistically to the cosmos as we have found it to manifest. So, I hope this answers some of your questions, and I imagine it opens many more. So you asked for it. This is, this is what I got for you. Your brilliant questions. So thank you for asking them.